Good afternoon. My name is Zaidi, and welcome to the second webinar in this series. The first webinar that we did last week was focused around building a modern data platform in the cloud. And my guest, Damian Danowski, shared the data journey that his team undertook at Airlines Reporting Corporation. And then in today's webinar, we are going to be talking about what it takes to maintain, sustain, and govern a modern data platform in the cloud. That is what we're going to be doing. Let me kind of share the agenda with you real quick, and then we can get started. So a little bit about AlyData. We are a professional services company, and our mission is to help our clients transform their businesses by using data and information assets effectively. And we offer three primary service offerings: a chief data advisory service, a data and AI governance service, and an insights service. The agenda for today, I will spend a couple of minutes to recap what we discussed last week for those who did not attend, and as a refresher for those that did attend. After that, we will, I'll spend a little bit of time talking about what the value of a modern data platform is. Then I'll dive into data governance and what does it take to govern a modern data platform. And then we will then transition into a sort of discussion and dialogue with Damian. Myself and Damian will talk about Airlines Reporting Corporation and their journey to build the lake as well as to govern and manage the lake. And then finally, we will spend about 20 or 25 minutes, depending on how much time we have, to address the questions from the audience. A few housekeeping items. Just wanted to inform everyone that this session is being recorded. So if you are comfortable with that, you can stay on. If you're not comfortable, please disconnect at the moment. Just wanted to put that out there. A disclaimer, we are a services company. We do have partnerships with several product vendors, but we are product agnostic. So AlyData as a company, we are product agnostic, but just want to put it out there that in today's webinar, we will be discussing a few products that were used at ARC. But please note that we are not trying to market or push any particular product. We also want this to be a dialogue, so we would really encourage you to post your questions and make this more interactive. So please post your questions in the chat window as and when they come up, and we will be scanning the chat window and pulling the questions and your comments from there. We will address questions, as I mentioned. We want to spend a significant amount of time on that. And then finally, a recording of this webinar will be posted on our website. So please stop by there if you want to go back and review the webinar, or if you have friends and your coworkers who would benefit from this. Before I get started, let me spend just a little bit of time telling you about Damian. Damian Danowski is the managing director of data services at Airlines Reporting Corporation. He's a technologist with deep experience in software product development and large-scale systems development. He began his journey in the data space a few years ago, having developed some new ideas about how ARC should manage and move its data platform to the cloud. And he has been the main architect and the force behind migrating all of the data infrastructure within ARC to the cloud, specifically AWS. And that's what we've been talking about. And sort of Damian has been sharing his experiences and his learnings. In addition to that, he has a program at ARC and has been very successful at that. So I just wanted to share that before we get started.
Thank you for that, Jay.
You're welcome. So the first question that companies have to ask, right, is what is your data strategy? Right? Before we go into figuring out data governance, data management, data maturity, et cetera, And there are two major themes that we see within our clients, right? Some clients are, have done a pretty good job of the defensive side, meaning they have a pretty mature risk management practice. They have a pretty mature compliance practice. And what they're looking at doing is to basically leverage data and the data assets to do better analytics, to get better insights, and to drive better reporting, right? So that's the offensive-minded organizations. And then there are others that are less mature or that don't have a very robust risk management capability. So they want to focus on the defensive side, which is, I want to make sure that I'm managing risk with respect to my data. I want to make sure that I am in compliance with the regulations, the various regulations, GDPR, CCPA being the latest ones. And I also want to make sure that my data is being managed and governed, and there's accountability for data within my organization. So these are the two different, focus areas within organizations. Some of them are on the offensive side, others are on defensive. And then there are others that want to do both. They want to mature their defensive capabilities as well as their offensive capabilities. So this is a very important aspect of that has to be taken into account before you dive in. So the next question is, what are some of the challenges that once you've decided that you want to build and mature your data management and governance capabilities, what are some of the challenges that we see? There are four primary areas that we wanted to highlight today. The first one is data discovery. Right? Our research shows that many of the data consumers spend about 50% of the time trying to find the data that they need to get their jobs done, trying to figure out who the subject matter expert is for that data, who do they go to, right? What is the authoritative source for that information, et cetera. Major challenge within organizations. The second area that we see is dark data. This is data that has been acquired, that is being managed, that is being stored, but it's not being used effectively. So 85% of data in most organizations is actually, can be used to generate valuable business outcomes. But the problem is that data is not easily accessible. That data is not cataloged, and that data is sort of, not available to the rest of the organization. So that is a major challenge that organizations are facing. The third area is data preparation. Again, 80% of the time that the consumers of data spend is on preparing data rather than spending a significant amount of time generating value from the data, generating insights. So that's the challenge that we have to address. And most of that is due to lack of understanding of the data, lack or poor data quality, challenges while integrating data, et cetera. And then finally, data quality costs. Again, 6% of the operating budgets of many of the organizations that we've looked at is spent on data quality and the impacts of poor data quality in the organizations. So these are the types of challenges that we want to address with data governance and putting together a robust data governance capability. So what do we mean by data governance, right? Data governance, the way I look at it, my apologies, is all about a system of people, processes, standards, and policies that ensure accountability and oversight of data assets to enable better business outcomes, operational efficiency, compliance, and risk management. Again, Damian is going to talk a little bit more and he's going to dive into sort of what each one of these mean. But I wanted to kind of define this upfront so that people understand that governance is all about accountability. It's all about oversight of data assets to make sure that you can generate better business outcomes. That's the bottom line. Here are the major components of a data governance program, right? There is a significant people component. There's a set of processes and procedures that have to be defined and distributed and embraced by everybody in the organization. Policies and standards have to be defined. There's a significant technology. You're introducing a lot of change, and that requires a significant amount of change management. And finally, you need training. We have to train the members of the organization that may not be familiar with the data governance policies and standards, tooling, processes, et cetera, so that they can be more efficient and effective in their jobs. And finally, you need tools because you want to automate a majority of the data governance processes and the capabilities that are needed. So these are the major components. And finally, before I transition to Damian, the question that we face all the time is data governance a project or is it a program, right? Data governance isn't a project, doesn't have a start and end date. It's a program. It's a maturity journey that most organizations have to get on, and it takes time to get it right, right? So as you can see on this chart that we've developed, if you start the items in green at the bottom is your level of maturity. So your level of maturity increases over time, but then from a data stewardship and governance standpoint, initially, you're going to spend a lot of time in the forming and norming stages where you're trying to build consensus, you're trying to create your organization for data governance, you're trying to get people to work together effectively. And then you get into some level of storming, meaning there's going to be pushback, there's going to be some challenges you're going to run into before you start performing and start delivering value. So important for everybody to keep that in mind, with respect to building and sustaining a data governance program. So with that, I will stop and I'm going to turn it over to Damian. I have a few questions for you, Damian,
Sure.
to get going. And then, feel free to share your screen at the appropriate time. I'm going to stop sharing now.
All right, let me see if I can do that then, and hopefully I'll get set up.
Okay.
Let me just say play.
Excellent.
How's that, Jay?
That's excellent.
Good.
So the first question I have for you, Damian, is how would you define the value and risk aspects of a modern data platform that you've built for ARC?
Well, I think that, first of all, thank you, Jay, for having me today, and thanks for the opportunity to share our journey. And I couldn't agree more with you. I just want to go backwards for a moment. I couldn't agree more with you on your previous slide that this is a journey. It's not a project. It is a program. It is a journey. It is important to realize sort of where you are in the process. And we're not going to dig into that today. I want to dig into this deck here in a little more detail. From our conversation last week, we talked about sort of two things. How do you get value out of this, and what are some of the risks, right?
Yeah.
So the value is that, with moving your platform into the cloud and creating something that's scalable both in storage and compute, you now have a platform where you can deliver data more efficiently for your organization and to your customers. So that's terrific value.
Yeah.
The risk side of that is that you now have a platform that is scalable and might be scalable in a way that can easily get out of control. So you have to have two things. You need a data management program and you need a data governance program, right? So these things are very important. We'll get to data governance in a little more detail, but first, from a management perspective, you're going to need some tools to help you wrap your arms around all this data. We use a data catalog for that, and we'll get into the details of that. But having a data catalog sort of centralizes that focus around data management and understanding your data. And so one of the things that you'll encounter when you start to implement a program and you start to get to this level of having this big scalable cloud platform, you're going to want data governance, and it's an overwhelming topic, right? There are just many books, many subject areas on it. One of the things that I think helped us be successful with our program is trying to boil that down to a couple of key features. And so we said, what are the outcomes that we want? What do we want our users and our consumers of our data to be able to have? And so when we looked at that from a governance perspective and a management perspective. So from a governance perspective, we wanted the users to be able to understand the meaning of the data, right? So they have to have a semantics and a context component. They have to be very easily able to do that. They have to be able to understand the authoritative sources. What data can I use to achieve a specific outcome? And as you mentioned, Jay, very important aspect was users spend an inordinate amount of time trying to find that data and then to validate, is this the, okay, so I found some data, is it the right data? So that metric that you put up there is very important because we want to make that smaller. We want to create efficiencies there, which will create value to the organization. Finally, I need to know who's accountable for this data. I'm going to look at this data and I'm going to have questions about it. I need to learn more about it. And so who's accountable for that, right? So typically in a governance program, that's a data steward, right? So who's the data steward associated with this data? Who can I call for help on it? So that's what I'm looking for from a governance perspective. Those are sort of the three important outcomes there. On a data management side, I need to understand the data's lineage. I want to be able to, that's part of the trust component, right? So I need to know where this data came from, what happened to it when I had it, and I want to know who else is using this. Is this a trusted source, right? So lineage is an important component to that. And I also want to have, it's also part of an audit and compliance component, right? It enables me to demonstrate validity in the data chain, right? From a trust perspective, I've got to be able to monitor the data. So lineage and trust sort of go hand in hand. I need to be able to monitor the data quality and I need to be able to remediate data to create trust. If a data steward or a consumer, the user of the data finds an issue, I need to be able to have a process to support remediating that issue effectively, right? Finally, one of the biggest things that is important today, you mentioned it earlier with sensitive data, trusted data. We have GDPR in Europe, we have CCPA here in the US. There are other, there's PII information, right? Personally identifiable information. There's a lot of sensitivity around data. I've got to be able to track and let users know if the data that they're working with is sensitive, and if so, in what way, right? So we want to combine these governance outcomes and these management outcomes as part of our program so that users can develop a trusted relationship with the data. Okay.
That is awesome. Thank you very much, Damian. That was a great way to kind of succinctly put together what data governance, the key components of data governance and data management are. And sort of, this will anchor some of the conversation that we have
Right.
going forward. So the next question I have for you is, what does it take to deliver the return on investment demanded by the business stakeholders? Because a lot of the data governance programs we've been involved in, there is certainly sometimes a disconnect between the business and technology and the data people. And the business, is hesitant to invest time and money and get their resources to participate in the data governance program, whether it's in a data stewardship role or whether it's in the subject matter expert role. So can you share your thoughts on that in terms of how other companies should be thinking about this and sort of how do you generate and show the ROI from your investments?
Right. No, that's a terrific question, Jay. And I think you planted the seeds that they're very important. So what's the most important outcome here for the business? Delivery of timely, accurate data. If our platform and our processes, our investment in our data can't deliver timely, accurate data, we're not going to get a lot of traction, right? So we have to demonstrate that capability. And I think the most important part of this is that the business and the technology teams have to work together. So from our perspective in trying to develop the program, we wanted to make it very clear up front that this isn't just another technology initiative being foisted on the business. We wanted the business to own it. So while, as a great many things do, things happened is that the technology sort of kicked this off, but we went into it with our eyes open saying, business, we need you to come to the table and we eventually want you to own this. We're want to provide the service and support for you to get what you need from this. But this is not just, we're not forcing this down your throat. We're looking for cooperation. The key to our doing that was developing this notion of a community of practice. So we identified leaders within the business who had a good understanding of the data and had sort of a knack or a bent for it. And we engaged with them, and we created a community of practice around a series of data stewards that could help us with our data. We have a steering committee that supports them. And then we also have an executive stakeholder committee that we read out to on a monthly basis that basically helps provide feedback in terms of where we're going with the program. But I think that buy-in, that community of practice, creating this back and forth with the business and keeping them engaged has been really important for our success with this.
That's yes, very, very important to make sure that you get buy-in from the key stakeholders and the key, I guess, participants in the various councils, as well as in the community of practice. So a good segue would be into what are some of the people, process, technology components of a data governance program, and how did ARC sort of go about that? Okay,
great. So I talked a little bit about the people in the community of practice, and I think that's important. And so, as I mentioned, we sort of have this hierarchy. We have data stewards in the community. We have a steering committee to support them. And then we have sort of executive oversight. So, but one of the things that we needed from a technology perspective is a tool, a data catalog, a centralized place for users to go to understand the data. So we talked a little bit about this last week, that we have this concept of a data lake. And we talked about our data lake being this single source of truth for our data, right? We can always trust data that's in the lake. We approached our data catalog as sort of a reflection of that. So our data catalog is a single source of truth for metadata. It's where you can go to get information about the data. So our data stewards and folks on our steering committee spend a lot of time doing what we call curation, right? It's documentation, it's tagging sensitive data appropriately. It's reviewing that information to make sure it's managed appropriately. It's making sure that access is managed appropriately. So from a policy perspective, and that's a big part of the governance process, and a big part of the journey that you mentioned is continuing to evolve that. Is our data quality improving? Are we addressing these things? Can our users find the data easily and understand it, right? So our data catalog is really, if you will, a tool that's trying to say, the better that data catalog is, the easier it is for our customers and our consumers to understand our data and know what they're working with, right? And so that's a really big part of the technology part. From a sort of an operating cadence part, our community of practice, we call it the data governance community of practice, meets on a monthly basis. Our steering committee meets on a weekly basis. We have engineering teams that meet, bi-weekly to work on data remediation issues and clarify things. And then our readout to the executive team is more or less on a monthly basis. So that's how all these teams interact around the data lake and the data catalog that reflects it.
Okay, so we have a great question from the audience. Okay. Rather than wait, this sort of ties into what where we were wanting to go.
Sure.
Is how do you get the business to work with you, right? From a data and technology standpoint, because sometimes there is tension between these organizations for various reasons. In other times, the business team may be extremely busy and may not be able to allocate staff, or may not be able to designate enough of their staff's time to help with this data governance program. So how do you get business to work with you, to make this a successful kind of journey, if you may?
Right. No, and that's a terrific question. And actually, I'm sure we could devote a whole nother another session to that because it's a challenge for all organizations. And I think what you have to do is create that value proposition that we talked about, right? Is you start down this journey typically, and then again, everybody's experience will vary, but you often start down this journey of you're challenged by the data. You're challenged about the things that you mentioned on the chart that you had where there's all this dark data that's unrealized. There's, I spend way too much time and therefore have way too many resources just trying to find the data and use it, right? And then you often have legacy systems that aren't scalable and make it difficult for, you spend all your time managing them, right? So here's one sort of thing to think about with this. When you get into a modern data platform and you have this scalable platform and you spend less time focusing on backups and job scheduling and all that sort of stuff, your focus on the data shifts from an IT space to the business space. So when I think about our journey and I think about the number of database administrators I used to have and the number of people I had managing jobs and all of that sort of stuff on our legacy platform, yes, I still need a good deal of that, but more of my focus now is on interacting with the data stewards and the consumers of the data who are driving the questions, right? And are driving our demand. So in a sense, we've shifted sort of the focus of the data from IT to the business. And once you start down that process, it's easier to engage the business to say, look, we want to deliver more value. We think we can deliver more value. It's going to take a data governance program to do that, and here's why. But once you have those sort of threads and you're going in that direction, it's easier to get in there, and it's part of the process. It's not the entire process. I'm reflecting our journey, and I think Jay, one of the things that I might jump ahead a little bit is reflect the lessons learned here.
Sure.
And engaging the business, I think it's important to be flexible. So just like when we talked earlier about the fact that data governance is a large subject, and if you pull the general books and processes and you try to implement this thing, if you will, by the book, that may work effectively in many organizations. But in some, you have to create a program that is sized effectively for your organization. So one of the lessons learned we had that sort of reflects on this topic is we started out sort of opening up the textbook and going down the chain, and we said, okay, well, we need these folks called data owners and they do this, and we need folks called data stewards and they do that, and all of a sudden the program became very large for the size of our organization, and the business pushed back on that. And then we had to go back and we had to say, well, that's fair feedback. Maybe it is too big, and we had difficulty defining, well, why do you need both roles? Who does exactly what? And how much time is it going to take? Because in most of these cases, aside from the technology folks, when you're asking business folks to become data stewards, they typically have a day job, right? They have a full-time job. You're taking a slice of that, right? So when you have additional roles and it's difficult to navigate that, we realize that, okay, well, we need to right size this for our group. Let's just focus on what the data stewards can contribute, and we'll see how we can grow with that. And maybe in the future, we're going to need those additional rules as our data scales and becomes more complicated. But now we're at that mode where we think we can govern and manage this with the data stewards only. And so again, everyone's mileage will vary, but you're going to have to approach the business and work with them to understand what's their appetite, right? And maybe starting out smaller and getting your foot in the door and creating some value then will lead to progress down the road. And that was how we were successful with our program.
Oh, that's great. So I think the key takeaway there, Damian, is like you said, being flexible and developing a model that can adjust on the fly, right? As we are rolling out, the program, gather regular feedback from the key stakeholders,
Yes.
and then adapt and adjust the program to make sure that the program is meeting their needs, as well as is not becoming a major burden on their resources, etc. So that's a great lesson learned. What about the technology? I know we wanted to spend a little bit of time diving into sort of the components of the ARC data governance architecture. So you might want to dive into that a little bit.
Sure. Let me share another slide here, if I may. This very simple, very high level architecture, we chose Alation as our data catalog. And Alation has a lot of terrific features. The most important one of which is it has a great connector technology. So it's able to connect to our S3 data lake and view information in it. It's also able to connect to our Snowflake data warehouse and reflect information from data marts. And we're also able to get information all the way through our Tableau, which is delivers some of our business analytics. And so part of this process then is we can have lineage of our data all the way from when it lands in the data lake in S3, how it's used in Snowflake, and essentially when you think about it from what we described earlier, how it's consumed in Tableau. In other words, who's the end user of it. So I can really trace all of that back end to end, and that's very powerful because one of the interesting metrics that you or statistics that you put up earlier was about dark data, right? Well, I know all the data that's in our data lake. And then now with a process like this, I know who's consuming the data. I can do some math and figure out who's consuming what percentage of our data, how much of our data is being used. And then also the exciting thing about that is if I can manage the data at that level, I can start to look at, well, if these data items or data sets are the most important to my data customers, when it comes down to prioritizing my time on managing that data must be pristine. That data has to be absolutely correct. First of all the data needs to be correct, but we all know data has issues and it has to be remediated, and we have to manage that. That's why we have a data management process. But this type of a overview of the data and having a tool and a catalog enables you to focus your energy, right? And that's an important aspect of this. Alation, again, has a lot of tools inside of it besides the connectivity. It has a compose tool that enables data stewards and data users in the business to actually query the data and say, what is this data? It gives you previews of things. The other thing we really like about the tool is that it provides what we refer to as social media-like capabilities. So I can endorse data, right? I can say, hey, this is probably the data you want to use for a certain topic. There's a sort of an engine running underneath in the background, monitoring every access to the data, so that then it creates what we commonly see in social platforms around, frequency of use, or when you think of the music applications like right? How many people have liked this? How popular is this song? There's very similar charts in Alation to show how popular is this data. So you're able to very quickly and easily see that. You're also able to tag the data for sensitivity. So we're able to very easily catalog all of our data, whether it's GDPR, PII, PCI, et cetera. And this is an important thing, and I know we're pressed for time, but I'll relay a particular activity that is the difference between a legacy data platform and a modern data platform with a governance process. Yeah. So I'll give you an example. In our legacy systems, we had a project in 2019 that probably had 8 to 10 people and lasted almost 6 months, tracking down all of our sensitive data and all the different databases we have, and trying to make sense of where this data was in case we had to remediate it, right? Now, as we moved all our data to our data lake, and we have Alation as our data catalog, we're able to tag all of our data items as sensitive and in what way they're sensitive. And now, instead of a 6-month project trying to find all this information, it's a simple query in Alation. Show me all of the PCI fields. Show me all of the PII fields. Show me what might be a GDPR field. That's incredibly powerful. Now, instead of 6 months and half a dozen people, I have, a couple of minutes query. And so this is the difference between a legacy data platform and the types of things you can achieve with a modern data platform. That's what's so exciting to me about this is it that, and when you talk about value to the organization, those are the types of value propositions you're able to put out there, right? And that's it. Now we've learned that, and that's terrific. And that's why I'm excited to share all this stuff, because we want folks to realize that there are ways to craft the messages and ways to demonstrate the gains that your business is going to achieve with platforms and tools like this.
Got it. No, that's great. So one point I wanted to make, Damian, in the presentation is that, you could pretty much replace Alation with any of the other leading tools, right? So the concept or the key idea here is, you could have a catalog that is your central repository for all of your metadata. And that catalog could be Alation, it could be Collibra, it could be, Data World, it could be any of the leading vendors. And each organization is going to be making that decision based on their specific requirements and their specific, what is it that they want to get out of it, right? In your case, you picked Alation, and after a thorough evaluation process. But then there are other organizations that might pick a different tool, right? Based that might meet their requirements much better.
Absolutely, Jay, and thank you for that. That's a very good point. And again, this was our experience. And to be fair, and we did POC a number of other vendors' products, and there are, again, given the prominence of big data and moving data to the cloud and these modern data platforms, there are a lot of players in this space. You mentioned Collibra, Informatica, so many. We could go on and on. I think we chose a tool that was, in a sense, right-sized for us. And there are just so many factors. Every organization is going to have a different set of requirements and a different decision tree that gets them to the end result. Right. But again, this was our choice for what was right-sized for us. There are so many possibilities here. Exactly. That's very fair. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to put it out there so that the members of the audience understand that in this case we are presenting ARC's architecture, if you may, but then you could pretty much replace some of these components with other products and still be able to do the same exact thing. So the another question that's come up from the audience, Damian, that's sort of related is you mentioned the discovery and tagging of sensitive data within ARC, and doing that automatically in a sense, right? Leveraging some of the capabilities of the product. So the question is, is AI and ML being used to identify what is sensitive, et cetera, and what kind of upfront work was done to sort of do the classification or defining your, privacy classifications and working with your privacy team, your legal team, your risk team, before you could actually go in and implement that within a tool or some technology?
Right. Great question. We do have a privacy program where we review privacy issues. Today, our tagging in Alation is essentially manual. So data stewards are tagging things on subject matter, on sort of a subject matter or a data set basis, and to help us tag the sensitive data. Again, we were able to use data from a previous comprehensive review for that. We have investigated other tools, and there are tools specifically for this purpose that actually integrate with Alation, and a great many of the other tools that are out there that you mentioned for data cataloging that actually do the AI part. They come in and actually scour the data and have classifiers that are able to help you not only look at the data types, but look at the data itself and do either anomaly detection or pretty accurate classification. And so again, depending on your data set and depending on the needs of your business, that's probably a very good investment and something to dig into. We've thought about that, and we've looked at, like I said, a number of vendors in that space, but we're not quite there yet in our journey.
Got it. So I guess to summarize, there are various ways to do it. A lot of the tools that are on the market today, products, typically use AI ML algorithms to do some of the pattern matching based on the classification rules that have been defined, and automatically tag the data. And then you have a curation process where the data stewards have to go in and approve these tags to make sure that they are accurate, because they may or may not get it right all the time.
That's correct.
So
and many of these
sort of
platforms use that feedback then again to improve their learnings. So yes, that's exactly the type of thing that's out there now. So you're able to, very similar to the architecture diagram that you're looking at here, you're actually able to take these tools, plug them in and connect them to your data sources. They will then crawl all of your data looking for those patterns, and then through feedback mechanisms able to improve their results. So many of them are very strong today, and the capabilities are quite impressive. As I said, we've looked at that, and we are not quite there in our journey, but I'm excited about the possibility of taking that next step.
Yep. Another question that is from the audience, a very interesting one, is how do you ensure that what's in the data lake is correct? And do you do some level of profiling or quality checks on the source systems, on the data lake, or in Snowflake, etc.? And then do you collaborate with the source system data stewards to instill confidence in the integrity of the data that is stored within the lake? I think you touched upon this last time, but this is a very, very important question in terms of, okay, how do we ensure that there is quality in the lake, and that the consumers of the data from the lake can trust the data that you're providing them?
Right. This is the chart we used last week. Apologize for the typo on it, but this is it's not as good as the one we used last week. I corrected it for last week's presentation, but this gives you the idea. So when we ingest data, we drop data into this concept called the raw zone, or these raw buckets, and it goes through a standardized zone and then on finally to the process zone. And our process zone, basically think of it as the production interface to our data. This is where consumers of the data go to get their data. So if it's a data products team who's building an analytic or a report, they source data from the process zone. The reason why I say that's very important to understand is there's a number of different quality checks along this path. So first, I receive data from internal sources, but also external partners. And so first thing I'm looking at is, did I get the right data? Is the data that vendor X is supposed to send me, what data they're supposed to send me? Does it look right? Is it the right number of records on average, et cetera? And as I go to the standardized zone, I'm actually taking that data and converting it and doing a whole bunch of quality checks on it. So now I'm not just looking at, okay, is this the right data set in general? I'm looking at the actual data and actually doing quality checks on the data items and preparing that data for, if you will, production in the process zone. So there are a lot of steps along the way. Now, the data can look good, right? Syntactically, contextually, et cetera, from a quality perspective and from a process, or if you will, a data pipeline ingestion process perspective. But ultimately, when we get things into the lake and then we start looking at them in the catalog, or teams start to consume that data, they might say, something's wrong. We have to go back to the source and we may have to do a data correction, right? Or we may have to reject a file back out to a vendor and get a new one if the file was improperly formatted or had bad data in it. So there is a whole, and that's really the process we call data management. So there's more or less front-end data management, which is kind of akin to an operational process, right? We're looking at that data coming in. If it gets bounced early in the process, so to speak, let's say at the raw zone, if it's just wrong, or if we're expecting a certain file and it never shows up, we're interacting with the vendor who provided that file to correct that process. Then as things go farther down, if it passes all the quality checks and we believe this is production quality data, we're putting it out there, someone might still find an issue with it, and that's a remediation effort, again, as part of our data management process. So there is, if you will, overhead and process around data quality throughout the process. Is that what you were looking for, Jay?
Yeah, and I think Damian, you might want to spend a couple of minutes diving a little bit deeper. If you could take an example, right? Because I think in last webinar you mentioned this whole concept of immutability, right? Once the data gets in, there is a way for you to ensure that that data is not being corrupted, if you may.
I can talk about that briefly.
Yeah,
sure,
I think it'll
Jay.
be valuable to share that with the audience.
Yeah. So one of the concepts that we started out with in our data lake, it's not an uncommon concept when you get to this type of a data platform, is data is ingested into the lake and it comes into this raw zone. We never ever touch or edit a file in the raw zone, right? So that concept of immutability is that I want to have a record of the data that came to me, regardless of the circumstance, whether it was right or wrong. And so if an updated file comes in, let's say that vendor A sends me a bad file and I update it, I still save that original one, just I maintain the idea that the file to use, if you will, I version the file to see that I now am going to use the quote unquote right file. And then as things move left or right into our process zone, I never really update the original data. If changes happen to it, we have a change data capture type of process that creates companion files with tags that tell you, what records to update, change, or or update, delete, et cetera. So we're actually building up a series of these change files on top of our, files of record or our reference files that then get processed later on, and if you will, what's the right word? They get consolidated or realized into the actual data. And so if you contrast that with traditional data processing, where one of the issues that many legacy systems have is that if I have a data remediation issue or a correction, it's a matter of an engineer typing a SQL query and that data changes. And then 6 months from now, when someone has a problem with that data, finding that change and understanding why it happened is often a difficult process, right? When you have, if you will, a data lake where the data is immutable and what you've essentially done is unwound the database, it's almost like your data lake becomes what is akin to a write-ahead log in a traditional relational database, where you have a record of every change in the data from time on. That's a little bit different approach to the data. The distinction is that at any point in time, you can always go back to the truth at that time, right? So I'm not ever losing data, and I'm only sort of continuing to add data to the system. You're able to do that because in this particular case, in the case of something like S3, I have a very reliable, very scalable storage platform, and it's relatively inexpensive. So me adding another 100 gigabytes or another terabyte of data doesn't materially change, my cost structure. It's a couple of dollars a month, right? But from a management standpoint, I can always go back if I do have to remediate something. I have traceability. Here's what happened. These 5 files showed up in this order. This is what they look like. Here's how we got from A to B. So that process is something that's kind of a very important process in changing from a traditional data warehouse or a traditional relational database to something like a data lake, where you're able to achieve things like that because of both the storage technology and the types of processing that you do on the data. And again, there's a lot more to this. That's a very high level review of it. I'd be happy to talk to folks offline about it. There are pros and cons to this approach. It's something that people have written a lot of papers about, and it's you know, frequently talked about. But it's one way to do this, and there are others. Like I said, would be happy to go offline and talk about it in more detail. I hope that answered the question, Jay, that you were asking.
Yeah, thanks, Damian. I think that was very helpful. And like you said, you know, we can spend many hours talking about this, and there's no real right answer, if you may. There's many answers to, or many ways to solve a particular problem. Do you want to dive into sort of a couple of examples of the data curation process, metadata curation process?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to do that. Let me just say one more thing about that previous question, if you don't mind. One of the things that enables us to do what we've done with our data is the fact that even though we have large volumes of data, our data is structured and well known. So we're not, you know, we know what we're getting, we know the format, we know the structure, and it's fairly well structured, and that makes the types of processing that we're able to do with our data. In other words, it enables us to take advantage of the types of things that I described, whereas not all organizations have that flexibility, right? Or that constraint that enabled us to do this. And that's one thing to think about. You know, again, it all depends on the demands of your organization. But if you want to talk a little bit about elation, Jay, and what you were asking about, you know, here's a really simple example. This is a screenshot from our elation tool. This may be a couple of versions back, and I apologize for that, but it's very close to what you would see today.
Damian, would you mind, sorry to interject, would you mind expanding your screen a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. Happy to do that if it helps. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you look at this,
thank you.
Okay, terrific. So when you look at this, first of all, you're seeing a lot here. There's a lot going on this. You're seeing that there's something called, you know, well, I'll tell you, it's flight schedule data. You can see, and I don't know what has happened to my mouse, Jay. I'm trying to get it up to point to stuff, but it's disappeared on my screen. I don't know what the heck. Maybe that's it. Anyway, you can see in the sort of upper right hand there where this little grid box is, you see these circles and there's a green check box. So there's the ability in Elation to do something called endorsements. Our data stewards, in terms of curating this data, they've created a description of the data. There is governance attributes about the data, its retention period, its update frequency, specific use rules or exceptions, who can and cannot see the data. You've got source details if you look down towards the bottom, and tells you, where does this data come from, right? And what's it look like in the data lake? You have, you know, Elation keeps track of who accesses the data. So you have top users of the data. You have the data steward is listed there. I know it's sort of covered up by the circle, but the data steward is listed there. This particular data item doesn't have any tags, but if you look at some other data items, you can tag the data. In this particular case, you see highlighted here that compliance standards, this particular data item is a piece of PII data, or potentially a piece of PII data. It has a retention time, et cetera. On the left, you see someone was doing a listing of show me all the PII possible data fields related to something called fare calculation. So there's a number of things you can do in the catalog that help you both from here, a standpoint of curation, and here, a standpoint of better understanding of the data. Is that helpful, Jay?
The semantics, yeah.
Okay, terrific.
And so Damian, you know, who are the users that are using the catalog? Are they primarily in the data space, or do you also have business users and others? I just wanted to get the audience to
Right.
understand.
Great question. So we have a number of groups of users. Today, we have the business side of the house is primarily the data stewards who are curating and using the data. We also have data products teams. So my data engineering teams are here in support of our data products teams. And we have a number of product teams that are building actual data products, whether they're analytics or reports or whatever our customers need. And those products vary pretty greatly. And so those folks are the primary consumers of the data. We continue to, if you will, increase the scope of access to the catalog by adding more and more business users. As people come onto our new platform, if you will, then they are more and more, they need more and more access to the data. We're having them adopted or provisioned onto the Elation platform, and then they're able to see the data and interact with it more. But the only reason for and it's reasonable, the progression there is that our processes and our transformation is progressing, right? So as more and more of our pieces of our technology infrastructure and our processing platform transition, the more and more business users will continue to add. But right now, those business users are primarily business users around our data products group.
Thanks, Damian. We're right on the hour.
Oh my goodness.
So really wanted to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to share and educate our audience. As you know, the primary purpose of these webinars is to raise awareness, make it interactive so we can address a lot of the questions from the audience and some of the pressing themes that we see, and also share what we are seeing in the industry in terms of the challenges and into some of these problems.
Thank you very much, Jay. I've
thoughts?
enjoyed it and hope I was helpful. No, I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity. If folks on the call want to reach out, Jay will send me the questions or connect us, and I'm happy to talk about these topics. I hope this was helpful for everyone today. Thank you all again.
And we will be posting the recordings on the website. I will notify everyone through LinkedIn and other channels as soon as the recordings are up there. So Please stay tuned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jay. Thanks, everybody.
Set of webinars.